Pastor.
Good morning. Secretary Panetta, in 2022, after Vladimir Putin and Russia invaded Ukraine, the United States, President Biden, and our NATO allies helped rally freedom-loving people across the globe to support Ukraine. What do you surmise Xi Jinping and the PRC took from that? What lesson did they take from the swiftness of that coalition?
As I mentioned in my testimony, I really do think that Russia and China grew more aggressive because they sensed a weakness on the part of the United States, that the United States was withdrawing from leadership in the world, was withdrawing from our alliances, and wasn't drawing the line on aggression. And I'm thankful that President Biden and our NATO allies drew a line on Putin. I don't think Putin expected that, very frankly. So it was really important for the United States and our allies to be able to say, if you cross that line, we will take steps to go after Russia. We'll undermine your economy, we'll provide military aid, and we will strengthen NATO. That was a clear message. And most importantly, the message was that the Ukrainians, because they were brave fighters, stopped the Russian invasion. That got the attention of Xi Jinping. And the fact that that invasion was stopped, the fact that the United States and our allies came together to help Ukraine has been a major signal, I think, to Xi to think twice about Taiwan.
Because around that time, Putin and Xi said that there are no limits to this deepening relationship. They wanted to convey that publicly, to send a message to the rest of the world. And I think that's correct. The swiftness of the coalition, the robustness of it sent a message to China and Xi. But now it seems like they're waiting for the next election this year, that they're kind of hedging that there's going to be a change in policy. And they see that the Congress has not been able to pass a supplemental to bolster the Ukrainian people. What is Xi Jinping and the PRC taking from the fact that the Congress is yet not united in continuing to repel this foreign aggression from Putin?
Look, I believe, as Mike Mullen has said, that dysfunction in Washington is a threat to our national security, because our ability to govern, our ability to work together, our ability to deal with the problems in this country, that's what democracy is all about. That's the strength of democracy, is the ability of Republicans and Democrats to sit down and to get things done, to provide the supplemental requests, to deal with defense issues, to deal with foreign policy issues. And when, for whatever reason, that breaks down and it doesn't work, what it does is it sends a signal to the world that the United States is not strong in our democracy, and that because of the dysfunction that we see in Washington, it is undermining our credibility in the world. So I can't tell you how important it is for the United States, for Republicans and Democrats, to work together as this committee is, to basically send a signal that we are unified when it comes to defending our interests.
And for Xi Jinping in particular, what do you surmise that they're considering right now as the U.S. does not follow through with the help to democracies and the Ukrainian people in particular?
Xi is very aware of what's happening with regards to our country, just as Putin is. And when they see dysfunction, when they see that we can't get our act together to be able to do what's right, then they sense that that's weakness, and it gives them the incentive to think that, given the opportunity, they can take advantage of that. So what we're doing, by failing to pass the supplemental, as I said, we're playing Xi Jinping's game. And we're playing Putin's game, which is that our strength is being undermined, not from abroad, but from within.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Barr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to both Secretary Panetta and Secretary Pompeo, thank you for your extraordinary public service. It's good to see both of you again. Secretary Pompeo, I enjoyed visiting with you in Monterey with your son Jimmy and playing a little golf. Thank you for tolerating my bad golf with Ted Balistreri. Great to see you again. And Secretary Pompeo, thank you for, as Secretary of State, elevating this issue of the threat from China and establishing the deterrence that we need to continue to be vigilant about. I want to ask you about the recent APEC summit and your impressions of that. Following that Biden-Xi summit, the Biden administration removed the Chinese Ministry of Public Security's Institute of Forensic Science from the Commerce Entity List in exchange for greater cooperation on stopping the flow of fentanyl precursors that are being produced in the PRC. Last year, I questioned Assistant Secretary of State Crittenbrink on states' role in pressuring other agencies to delay implementation of sanctions and export controls. Secretary Pompeo, what kind of message does it send to our adversaries if the State Department intervenes to prevent the listing of PRC entities who should be sanctioned or subject to export controls?
Congressman Barr, I think that's an enormous policy mistake. I think it not only sends the wrong message, but I think the likelihood of Xi Jinping delaying precursors for fentanyl moving into our country is precisely zero as a result of that action. He has been determined to continue to poison our children here at home, and I don't think any action taken by the United States Department of State to sort of relieve them of any penalties, restrictions, prohibitions is likely to change his direction on that.
And just for context, this ministry that was removed from the Commerce Entity List, this is an instrumentality of the CCP that has engaged in horrendous genetic testing of Uyghurs and human rights violations. Secretary Panetta, you noted in your testimony that our adversaries routinely weaponize economic tools of market access and trade dependencies, such as fossil fuels from Russia and critical minerals from China. Last week, it was announced that in an effort to combat climate change, the Biden administration would be halting LNG exports. This administration, however, has extended 8 times a Treasury General license allowing for transactions involving Russian energy exports, including oil, to be exempt from U.S. sanctions. Do either of these actions, the action to block LNG exports to our allies in Eastern Europe, or the action to provide a general license to our sanctions regime against Putin, do either of those actions help us cut off funds from Moscow?
I don't know whether, and I hope they haven't, the administration has made a final decision with regards to LNG. I know the president has postponed that issue and is looking at some of the issues related to regulations, but I think it is very important to be able to provide that kind of fuel to our allies, for goodness sakes. Because they've joined with the United States, they have lost the ability to have to rely on Russian energy. That's a good thing. And we ought to be providing the support necessary in order to give them the ability to be independent of that source of energy. So I hope that the administration moves forward with the LNG and allows that fuel from the United States to be able to go to our allies.
Thank you. I agree with that. I think exporting energy, producing energy is a geopolitical tool, and it's a grave mistake to not recognize that. But in addition, I want to talk a little bit about, as a member of the Financial Services Committee with oversight over Treasury, the Treasury's Department's inexplicable decision to provide a license to Russian banks to allow them to process energy transactions. And I've spoken with Secretary Yellen about this. I've spoken to Wally Adeyemo. These are great public servants who are trying to do right with this oil price cap regime. But the problem is the oil price cap is not working. Russian crude is trading above the cap, and it's not enforceable. To me, what would make more sense is to sanction dirty, polluting Russian energy and produce more American energy to help our allies. Can either of you speak to that?
I think you made a very good point, and that's what we should be doing.
Well, I thank the gentlemen for their testimony and their service. And once again, Secretary Pompeo, thank you especially, or Secretary Panetta, thank you especially for your incredible work with the intelligence community in the lead up to the Abbottabad mission. That was some great patriotic work, and this country is eternally indebted to your leadership. I yield back.
Thank you. At some point, someone will play you in a movie too, Mr. Secretary Pompeo. Fear not.
I fear that's true.
Yeah. Mr. Kim is recognized for 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the two of you for coming on out and talking to us here. Secretary Panetta, I'd like to start with you. I've been listening to your responses to some of these questions. You've had a couple of really great points I'd love to flesh out and bring out some more. You talked about deterrence. And the critical nature of two components there in terms of our military and our economic strength. But also you, in response to one of my colleagues, talked about the importance of sending a signal to the world that we're strong and the credibility that's there. And so I want to try to merge these together because, you know, when I had a conversation once with a leader from the Indo-Pacific region, you know, they were talking about, look, the American military strength is here. They're asking, you know, the United States is asking us to join that component. We're having these talks about economic strength, and yes, that's part of it. But what they pointed out was one thing. They said that the number one question that they talk about amongst themselves about what to do with the United States and China, and that other countries are talking about, is this singular question, which is America a reliable partner? And they said it to me in a way that they just said, we know the answer to that right now. You know, all the challenges that we see, domestic turmoil and other things like that. So I guess I wanted to ask you, you know, when you talk about deterrence with military and economic strength as these two pillars, would you be amenable to the idea of kind of adding a third pillar there of political strength too? Of showing that, you know, if you have the strong military, the strong economy, without that component of being able to have a government that can make decisions decisively, quickly, that it weakens the components of the other elements of deterrence. Is that something that makes sense to you?
No, it makes a great deal of sense. Look, what represents the power of the United States? Obviously, our military capability, our diplomatic capability, our economic strength, those are the strengths of the United States. But most important is the word of the United States, and whether we stand by our word, whether we are credible. And so when it appears that we are weak in the sense of delivering what we promised we would do, it hurts our credibility. I mean, I've been abroad, just like you have, and I've talked to foreign leaders. And the question that they inevitably ask is, what's happening in the United States? Can we trust the president? Can we trust the Congress? Can we trust an ally? Those are the questions I get. And I'm sure others have gotten the same question.
Yeah, thank you.
And the important thing is that we have to show that what we say we will do, we do. And if we back away from that, it sends the wrong message to the world.
Yeah, thank you, Secretary. Secretary Pompeo, I'd love to kind of bring you into this, you know, with the challenges that you see before us, the fact that two of you served here in Congress and you're seeing what we're up to, the challenges we're facing, this constant threat of a government shutdown that we just keep struggling with, this issues with the supplemental. I guess I wanted to ask your thoughts of what Secretary Panetta just said. You know, what is the importance of our ability to fix our own system and get our own house in order, show that the bipartisanship that we have here is something that can extend to 435 in the House and 100 in the Senate. I'd be interested in your thoughts.
Yes, I lived the dream as well. Passed a handful of continuing resolutions on my watch too, much to the Department of Defense's consternation, right? We couldn't redirect our resources. The same was true during my time In the executive branch, I watched Congress unable to actually move resources to the current day challenges. As time moves on, one needs to be able to then continuing resolutions prevent that. So I was a big advocate for trying to work through the appropriations process, get that done. But I'm also mindful these are serious matters, and there are differences in judgment and opinion. I don't mind the to and fro, the angst that people somehow describe. I'm unbothered by a rambunctious American democracy. That never troubles me. In the end, we have to deliver the policy prescriptions that get it right. I heard, maybe this is the first place we'll disagree, I heard Secretary Panetta speak earlier about deterrence in Ukraine and Xi Jinping. I think Xi Jinping saw what happened, an invasion of Vladimir Putin in Ukraine, and he is not suggesting that we should pat ourselves on the back in America, right? The one free bite at the apple killing tens of thousands of Ukrainians is not something that we should be proud of. We lost deterrence in Ukraine. We shouldn't applaud ourselves for rallying NATO. That's great. I'm glad the Europeans stood up. But we should remember that we did not conduct American foreign policy with the diplomatic excellence and the military power to actually convince Putin not to invade Ukraine. We have to win these things. It is insufficient to catch incoming missiles. Right? You have to hold your adversary at risk. And as we think about the CCP, this was my central theory. This was to what Congressman Barr said. My effort as Secretary of State was to remind the world that if we don't hold the CCP at risk, if we simply play defense economically, defense diplomatically, we allow a spy balloon to travel over our country for 5 days and then hold a press conference announcing what brilliance it was to shoot it down over South Carolina. Right? That Xi Jinping gets that he's on offense, we're on defense, and that is not a good place for the United States to be.
Mr. Newhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretaries, welcome this morning. It's an honor to have you both here. And Mr. Panetta, just so you know, your son is honorably carrying on the tradition of public service. I guess the jury's out on it.
I appreciate that.
We take a poll?
Family affair.
Good. So peace through strength, that's something that we've lived with and have tried to exercise for many decades. And I think I agree with both your comments in that regard. We as a committee went through a tabletop exercise, some people call it a war game, to see what scenarios and outcomes would look like in the event of China moving on Taiwan. I heard someone say that it was a prevent war games because at the conclusion of that, no outcome was anything that anybody would like to see on both, I think on either side. The cost would be very high. One of the goals, I think, of many people is to have President Xi wake up every morning and think, today's not the day. That there are so many deterrents staring him in the face that he would come to that conclusion. And I think I've heard from Secretary Gates, Robert Gates, that no one in the Chinese military has experience on any kind of major war. No general has any war experience. And so there's a lot of reasons why maybe an invasion would not be their first course of action, which leads me to maybe a more probable course of action. I just returned from Japan recently, and the number of incursions in Taiwanese and Japanese airspace by aircraft from China is in the hundreds every year. The naval ships that the presence of the Chinese Navy on the eastern coast of Taiwan is constant. So if an invasion, all-out invasion cost is too high and too difficult, what can we do as a country to prevent or stop or deter China from taking an easier route, perhaps, of a blockade and simply just strangling Taiwan from outside any travel or anything coming into the country?
There is no question that the most important thing we can do with regards to Taiwan is to strengthen their deterrence and to not only provide the arms, but provide the training necessary for them to be able to defend themselves, and to show that the United States will maintain a presence in that area with our Navy, and with our other capabilities. It's important to make clear to China that they aren't going to have a free ride if they decide to make trouble for Taiwan. But it is very important that if we say we will defend them militarily, that we defend them militarily. And that means providing whatever support they need if they are, in fact, a victim of aggression by China. The thing that Xi is going to constantly be looking at is whether or not we are taking actions. This is not about words. This is about actions. And what we do to support Taiwan and to maintain a strong presence in the South China Sea, those are the kinds of actions that Xi will watch very closely and be deterred by.
Thank you. Mr. Pompeo?
Just two thoughts. I agree with Secretary Panetta. Two thoughts. A blockade gets ugly really quickly. The difference between an invasion and blockade is a continuum, for sure. Once product ceases to flow out of Taiwan into the rest of the world, a country upon Taiwan is a country upon which the entire world is dependent daily for deliveries across the world. It gets difficult very quickly. It gets difficult for the Vietnamese, the Japanese, the Philippines, the Australians, even more quickly than it does for us here in the United States. And so we should not, I guess my urging is not to think about the blockade as a more peaceful or more genteel solution to Xi Jinping's desire to bring Taiwan under his political control, but an act of war very much in the same way that an invasion would be.
Thank you. Ms. Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both of our witnesses. It's certainly quite significant to have both of you here testifying before our committee, and we thank you for your time. Mr. Pompeo, in your testimony, you talk about the economic war and the war that we have been in and maybe sometimes pretending we aren't in. Do you see economics as the primary motivation for the CCP to align itself with American adversaries and in many respects taunt us on the global stage, or are there other motivations?
Thank you for the question, and thanks for the kind words. You actually got 100% of the former Italian-American CIA directors here today, so quite an accomplishment.
And I joined the Italian caucus.
This is thank you for that. We appreciate it. No, I actually think their primary motivation is ideological. It is Xi Jinping is driven by a Marxist-Leninist ideology, a historic understanding of China as the middle kingdom of the central actor on the world stage, and he feels there is a that their history has been wronged by the Western order. And so economics is a tool by which he seeks to achieve the global hegemony that he so seeks, but I think the motivation is much deeper and much darker than just trying to figure out how to make a few more renminbi for his people. This is not an effort to improve life for the Chinese people. This is an effort for aggregation of power for the Chinese Communist Party.
And as we look towards maintaining the post-World War II order, as you described in your testimony, what does that look like in this 80-year mark that we're about to hit since the end of World War II, and with some of the changing dynamics that have hit the West, particularly with Brexit as an example, as well as the West's reliance on CCP investment in their economy? How do we bring along our European allies to this deterrent strategy, given that you're a former Secretary of State and not a former head of Treasury?
Goodness. So in the end, the central thesis has got two legs to it. One is respecting national sovereignty. Nation states acting in their own self-interest. We marked it as America first. I always reminded others, when I was in Asia, I would remind that, ma'am, you think Bangladesh should be first. You're running that country. Sovereign nations acting in their own interest. And then second, the United States has a deep interest in protecting basic freedoms and property rights and contractual capacity to deliver against increasing efforts to undermine market-based economies. Right? This is one of the central theories of Xi Jinping: is show up in Africa with some stolen intellectual property from the United States that you built with cheap labor inside of China, and then dump it on the world in an effort to aggregate political power. We have a model that is deeply different from that. We should not head down that route, but we have to make sure that an increasing number of nations benefit from these central ideas of basic property rights, contracts, the capacity to engage in relationships in a way that protect basic human dignity as well.
And the use of American innovation as a place of strength, not to be exploited through those who do not necessarily share our goals for free and open capital markets success. And there's a lot to be said around this idea of how we maintain the post-World War II order and redefine it for the time period that we are in today, looking not only back to a great history that defined so much economic success for individuals, but also for the world. And we need to think very strategically about how we're working with our allies, particularly on supply chains and access to minerals. And Mr. Panetta, with just the slight remaining time, would love to get any thoughts you have about Iran and what the CCP's motivations are, particularly as we're facing another pressure with democracy being under attack with our friend Israel, as well as some of the impeding terrorist demands that are coming down.
Okay, I think you get it, and you understand where we really have to go in order to develop the strength of the United States and our allies in economic competition with China. China engages with Belt and Road initiatives. They engage in spreading a lot of money around. They engage in building ports and doing all kinds of things that pretend to help countries. But let me tell you, it doesn't work because countries feel like they are not the ones that are really benefiting from this. And that's why the United States needs to continue to show how we should promote economic justice.